let's preview some real meaningful hockey, shall we? Welcome to From Center Ice, the shorty episode where it is just me, Courtney, talking into the microphone about all things hockey. And today, well, I guess my cat's making an appearance, but today, all things hockey to me means previewing the Blackhawks versus Edmonton Oilers series that starts tomorrow. I am recording this on Friday, the day before the qualifying round starts, and I feel like hi, buddy. My cat is also very excited. I feel like a kid on Christmas Eve. We finally have real meaningful hockey games coming back, and I couldn't be more excited. We've had a few days now of exhibition games. Today is the day off, so I've spent the day doing my actual job, so I didn't have to do it over the weekend when meaningful games are being played. But aside from that, I also spent time researching this upcoming Edmonton Oilers Chicago Blackhawks series, so I am here to preview that for you. So we will jump into that once I pull my notes up. So like I said, we've had a few days of the exhibition games to kind of get used to what this whole return to play atmosphere is like. I don't know when we'll drop the return to play shtick. I guess we could do that now since it's technically going to be playoff qualifiers. Maybe we can drop that and just say qualifying hockey, playoff hockey. I don't know what you want to call it. Apparently, teams that are in the qualifying round have made the postseason, but it's not technically the playoffs. I don't know. It's hockey. It's meaningful. It actually matters. I don't care. So, we didn't know what it would look like. Obviously, the arenas are empty. There are no fans allowed because of COVID-19, but I think the league actually did a very good job with the setup. So we've seen in other sports, there have been cardboard cutouts, there have been empty seats. It just looks very strange. But what the NHL did is they took, I don't know what kind of material it is, but basically huge canvas tarps and put them over the lower bowl seats. So it almost just looks like you're watching the Winter Classic because you can't see the fans anyway. And it looks a lot nicer than just staring at a bunch of empty seats. That would just be really depressing. Like, we already know that there's no fans in the arena, but that would really just hammer the point home that nobody is there watching this. And because there are no fans in the arena, there is no cheering, which is also interesting. But what they've done is pipe in crowd noise, and I feel like it's just through the TV. So the players aren't actually hearing it, but I could be wrong. I don't know that for sure. But I've seen a couple of videos posted by the team's social media accounts, and it doesn't seem like you can hear the fan noise. I don't know if they're just too far away when they're recording the videos or what, but grab some water here so my voice doesn't give out on me. You can hear it on the TV, and it doesn't really sound out of place. When I heard they were going to do it, I was like, this is going to be really cheesy. It's going to sound weird. But it's just kind of hockey sounds that you're used to. So you hear the skates on the ice, the puck hitting sticks and hitting the boards and whatnot. And then you just hear ambient crowd noise. It just feels like you're watching an average game. You just don't see the fans down in the standings. So I think they've done a good job. There was a game on last night between Las Vegas and Arizona, and they didn't have the crowd noise, and it did feel rather quiet. I didn't really notice it until I saw it popping up on Twitter asking whether the crowd noise was there or not, but I did notice that the game seemed quieter. So whether they keep going with the crowd noise or not, I think it will be fine. Some people really hated it. Some people didn't mind it. I'm of the opinion that I didn't mind it. It felt real. It was kind of odd because, of course, when you're watching a game in normal times when there's fans in the crowd, you'll get louder cheers when the momentum really picks up or when pucks go toward the net or different things like that. And it only really goes crazy on the feeds now when there's a goal. So it's a little different, but I don't know. To me, I don't mind it. It doesn't sound too misplaced. You don't get all of the action. So if you're like looking down at your phone or looking at your computer or anything that us people who try to cover the games do, and the people who cover it more professionally than us, usually you can rely on crowd noise for like, oh, I need to look at what's going on because something's typically happening, but now you just kind of have to pay more attention, so that should be interesting. Tomorrow, covering an actual meaningful game, I plan on hopping on to our Twitter account to live tweet the game. If you want to follow along there, it's at VF Center Ice Pod. That'll obviously be in the show notes for you to check out if you want to follow along there. So yeah, that'll be interesting. Hopefully I won't get too distracted and I'll be able to look up at the TV a little more, but I will have the broadcasters, thankfully, talking me through the game while trying to live tweet it and take notes for a post-game article and probably a post-game podcast. I'm not going to commit to it now. If not a post-game podcast, there will be one talking about it on Sunday and probably a preview podcast for Game 2. Speaking of articles, I did put out a preview article tonight just before hopping on the microphone here that can be found over at Rockford Buzz. There is a link to it on our Twitter account and on our Facebook page. There's not a link on our Instagram account, so make sure you hop on over to Twitter or Facebook so you can go check that out. I spent 4 hours writing and researching it, so I would really appreciate if you gave it a share and actually read it. I put a lot of time into it because I was interested, I tried to hit points that I wanted to know myself going into it. So if there's anything else that you guys would like to know as the series progresses, or fingers crossed the Blackhawks go into the first round of the actual playoffs, obviously just let me know. You can either comment on Facebook, you can send me a tweet, or you can email me at vfcenterice@gmail.com. No, it's, vfcenterice@gmail.com, I think. Here we go. I don't even know what my own email address is. So I'm going to look it up because apparently I just don't have it written down. Yes, vfcenterice@gmail.com. I was right all along. How about that? So yeah, if there's anything else that you guys would like to know, like me to look up for you, I can do my best to do that. I don't know everything, obviously. I do not cover hockey professionally. I just call myself a professional hockey fan, and I've turned that into a podcast. Normally, Jacqueline would be sitting here with me, but of course, crazy times, crazy circumstances. I'm doing these shorty episodes, and the last shorty was 40 minutes long, so I don't know how short they really are. But the whole idea of that was I am short-handed, so going off of that play. Anyway, so the atmosphere feels good. They got the look of it down. I'm really glad they covered up the seats so it doesn't look super depressing. And the piped-in crowd noise isn't too bad. We have heard all of the team's goal songs during the exhibition games. I don't know if they plan on continuing that in the actual games or if they're going to just play the goal song of the home team. I don't know what they plan to do there. I guess we will see starting tomorrow what the deal is with that. But one of the downsides to this whole experience has been the refs' microphones. So also yesterday there was a game for Colorado, I forget Minnesota, a game between the Avalanche and the Wild. And the refs' mics were kind of like cutting out and skipping. It almost sounded like you were playing a record backwards. It was very odd. And then it happened again during the Golden Knights and Coyotes game, and I thought I was going crazy. Thankfully, there were people posting about it on Twitter, so I know it wasn't just me. So hopefully the league can get that figured out before tomorrow. I'm sure they heard it and can assess what was going on, but again, this is the NHL, and we always talk about how they don't always fix things, or they fix things that aren't broken. So I will assume they will fix something that is not broken instead of fixing the refs' microphones so we can actually hear what they are saying. But we don't know. So we will see tomorrow how smoothly the production goes. I'm not holding my breath, but they've done things pretty well so far. So we will see. They still have 0 positive tests for this past week. I know I said that in the last episode for the last week of training camp, but came out again today that there have been 0 positive tests again, so that is absolutely fantastic news. I mean, of course, we want hockey to continue. We want to see this qualifying round play out. We want to see the playoffs play out and see a 2020 Stanley Cup awarded. But most of all, we just want health for the players, coaches, all the staff, everybody involved in this thing. It is a big production, and there are a lot of people's lives on the line, so as long as we can keep these tests coming back negative, that's absolutely incredible, and I'm so happy about that. So now that that's all out of the way, let's jump into talking about this upcoming series between Edmonton and Chicago. So if you aren't aware, the qualifying round is a best-of-5 series and not a best-of-7 like the actual playoffs. So it has the potential to be shorter. Of course, not all playoff rounds go the full 7. Some are done in 4, 5, 6. But the qualifying rounds can be won in 3 games. I hope we don't... I don't want to say don't see any like that, but it'll be nice to get as much hockey as we can. Of course, if Chicago wants to win in 3, I will not be upset about it. I don't want to put that jinx out in the universe. I am banging very quietly on my wooden table. So, yeah. So, best of 5, a little more pressure because, again, a lot of teams have come back down 3-0 to challenge for a Game 7. It doesn't happen all the time. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. But now you will only be able to go down 2-0 without worrying about being eliminated. So, Edmonton versus Chicago. Edmonton is a high-flying team. They have the best player in the world in Connor McDavid, and they have the second head of the 2-headed monster of terror that is Leon Draisaitl. They are playing center on the first and second lines. Obviously, McDavid is line 1, Draisaitl line 2. They are absolutely terrifying, and getting a rested and recovered McDavid and Draisaitl, I don't know how the Hawks are feeling right now. I'm sure they're probably trying to be as confident in themselves as possible, but for us as fans, that's just terrifying. And I'm sure Edmonton fans are thrilled that they don't have to worry about McDavid or Draisaitl being injured. So how I laid this out was going off of recent playoff experience, and then I have this year's rosters, and then I have a couple storylines that I am interested in myself. So, for recent playoff experience, obviously the Blackhawks come out ahead in this one. For Edmonton, the last time they made the playoffs was in 2017, and that was the first time the Oilers made the playoffs since 2006. And they lost in the second round to Anaheim in Game 7 in 2017. They did better than the Blackhawks in the 2017 playoffs, because if you recall, that was the year that the Blackhawks played Nashville. They only scored 3 goals in the whole damn series and got swept in 4 games. That was very depressing, and they've missed the playoffs ever since. But before that, of course, we had 3 cups in 6 years. We are very spoiled as Blackhawks fans. It's kind of ridiculous to even complain about being swept in the playoffs and then missing for 2 years and then just kind of being thrown into a playoff mix by the league because they wanted to include more teams this year. The Blackhawks had no business being anywhere near the playoffs this year, but now that they're here, I have hope. They have roped me back in, and now I just want them to win. I was so ready to just sit this one out and watch the other teams and just be happy to watch hockey, and then they had to go and tell us that Chicago was involved. So now I get to be stressed out, so that's great. So yeah, 3-6, the Hawks started their dynasty run in 2010 by beating Philly in 6 games. And then in 2011, they lost to Vancouver in the first round in Game 7, coming back from one of those 3-0 series deficits that I was talking about. That was a rough one. And then in 2012, they lost to Phoenix, who is now the Arizona Coyotes, of course. They lost to them in 6. And that one has something to do with this upcoming series because Mike Smith was the goaltender for Phoenix back then, and he got hot and just destroyed the Hawks. So that's a good memory going into tomorrow. And also, that series was one that has somehow just defined Corey Crawford's career. Even though he went on from that to win 2 Stanley Cups, people still point to that series in 2012. That's right, 2012. This is 2020. That was 8 years ago. They still point to that series to say that Crawford is a bad goalie. I don't understand it. Nobody should understand it. It's a terrible argument. It's not even an argument. It's a stupid point. That could be a whole nother episode on its own. So we just like to forget about 2012. And then obviously the Hawks went on to win the Cup in 13 in 6 games against Boston. That was the wonderful 17 seconds where I, of course, missed the game-winning goal because I left the room thinking they were going to go to overtime. They didn't go to overtime. I missed the goal. I did see the last minute and change and got to see the win, but I wish I could have seen Boland's goal. But alas, that was 7 years ago at this point. I can only regret it so much. 2014, the year after that wonderful 17 seconds, was my biggest hockey heartbreak. That was the Game 7 conference final loss to Los Angeles. It was awful. People point to that series as being one of their favorite series to watch ever because the hockey was so great. I can't even give it credit. I can't go back and watch it. It was just so upsetting for me seeing that puck go in off of Leddy over Crawford's shoulder. I'm pretty sure it just replays in every single nightmare that I have. That was a bad one. Of course, Los Angeles went on to win the Cup that year against the Rangers. So if we had beat them in that game, in that overtime, there was the potential for the Blackhawks to get a three-peat as Stanley Cup champions, because the next year in 2015 they went on to beat Tampa Bay in 6 games to win the Stanley Cup yet again. So that just makes 2014 even worse, because who knows, we could have won 3 cups in a row and been even more obnoxious to the hockey world than we already were winning 3 and 6. So for us, it is tragic. For everybody else around the league, they are telling us to just get the hell over it. And I understand that, but I will never get over it. But after that cup in 2015, it gets rather tragic because they lost in 7 games in the first round in the very next year to the St. Louis Blues, and then of course the series where they got swept by Nashville that I talked about before, and then went on to miss the next 2 years. So the last glory year was 5 years ago. The first was in 2010. This is 2020. Maybe we kick off another decade of greatness. I don't see it happening, but it could. It could. Crazier things have happened. I am aware, but there is definitely a major, major mountain to climb, and everything will have to be firing on all cylinders from the coach all the way down to our backup goaltender. But you never know. Get in the playoffs, anything could happen. I guess technically we're not in the playoffs, we're in the qualifier. But again, how do we even talk about this? Do we just keep calling it the qualifying round, or can we call it the playoffs yet? I don't know. I'm going to keep saying qualifier because I don't want to get yelled at. But it's, in my head, it's the playoffs. The playoffs start tomorrow. Whatever. So like I said, Edmonton last made the playoffs in 2017. It was McDavid's second year in the league. They lost in the second round. So the Blackhawks are definitely more experienced in the playoff world. There are not that many players left on this roster that won the Cups with Chicago. So going on to the rosters, I read them in the last episode, or at least I read Chicago's roster, but I'll go over it again. So at forward, we have Dominic Kubalik, Alex DeBrincat, Dylan Strome, Jonathan Taves, Brandon Saad, Ryan Carpenter, Matthew Highmore, Brandon Hagel, John Quinville. He's like second cousins with Joel Quinville. Mackenzie Entwistle, who we got in the trade for Marian Hossa when we sent his contract off to Arizona. David Camp, Philip Kurashev, Kirby Dock, Patrick Kane, Drake Caggiula, Alex Nylander, and Dylan Sekura. At defense, we have Duncan Keith, Connor Murphy, Oli Mata, Adam Boquist, Calvin DeHaan, Lucas Carlson, Nick Seeler, Slater Cuckoo, Nicholas Beaudin, and Alec Regula. And our goaltenders, we are one of a few teams carrying 4 goaltenders into the playoffs, which I feel is smart because you just never know what's going to happen, and I don't believe they have emergency backups in this playoff setting, so you'll have to dress a skater if you don't have a goalie ready to go. So we have Malcolm Subban, Kevin Lankinen, Corey Crawford, and Colin Delia. And if we are to go off of the game against St. Louis on Wednesday, the 2 goalies who will be dressing tomorrow are Corey Crawford and Malcolm Subban. Let's see. And then we have the Oilers roster. So I looked at this, I pulled it up today, and I saw a lot of names that I did not realize were on an NHL roster. But clearly Edmonton was better than Chicago this year, so they're doing something right. I mean, Connor McDavid and Draisaitl, but aside from them, at forward, we have Joakim Nygard, Josh Archibald, Jujhar Khaira, James Neal, Riley Sheahan, Andreas Athanasiou, Leon Draisaitl, Alex Chiasson, Zach Kassian, Tyler Benson, Patrick Russell, Kyler Yamamoto, Tyler Ennis, Cooper Merity, who I have never heard of, Ryan McLeod, Gaten Haas, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and of course their captain and best player in the league, Connor McDavid. At defense, we have Chris Russell, Adam Larson, Darnell Nurse, Ethan Bear, Evan Bouchard, Oscar Clefbaum, Caleb Jones, Matt Benning, William Lagesson? I don't know, never heard of him. And one of their rookie defenders, Philip Broberg. At goaltender, they are only carrying 3 goalies in, with Mikko Koskinen, Mike Smith, and Stuart Skinner. So, we will see how these rosters face up against each other. I did look up the top 5 point leaders for both teams. It's kind of hard to go off of the regular season since it was 4.5 months ago. Clearly, both teams have had the same amount of time off. They've been able to rest. They've been able to prepare to come back and play. I don't know how much video they've watched or any of that, so I really can't tell you how much different things will be leading into the series starting tomorrow than it was during the regular season. We can only hope that the Blackhawks will play better and Edmonton will play worse, but again, not holding my breath for that one. So the point leaders for the Blackhawks were Patrick Kane. He had 70 games played, 33 goals, 51 assists for 84 points. Jonathan Toews had 18 goals, 42 assists for 60 points in 70 games as well. Dominik Kubalik, our rookie sensation, had 30 goals, 16 assists, 46 points in 68 games. It's such a shame he's not going to win the Calder this year because Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes were lighting it up on defense out west, but in our hearts, he is the Rookie of the Year, and that's just how it should be. I guess this is karma for Artemi Panarin winning the Calder when he was on the Blackhawks roster, even though he was 26 and up against Connor McDavid, but, whatever, right? Like, Kubalik still deserves it. I don't care what anybody says. He scored 30 goals as a rookie. That's ridiculous. So then our fourth and fifth point leaders were Alex DeBrincat with 18 goals, 27 assists for 45 points in 70 games played, and Dylan Strome with 12 goals, 26 assists, 38 points in only 58 games. He was injured, so we'll see what happens. And I also put aside some players to watch in this series for both teams. So sticking with the Blackhawks, I have as number 1 Kirby Dach, our other rookie sensation, of course. I feel like this series against Edmonton for Dach could really be a coming out party, and that's kind of funny to say since he's only a rookie this year. He's still super young. You would expect that to happen maybe 2 or 3 years from now. But from what I have seen just in that exhibition game against St. Louis, and from what everybody was saying about his training camp, Kirby really came back looking fast, looking prepared, and looking to really show what he can do. So coming into last season, he had played, or I guess the regular season for this year, he had played a ridiculous amount of hockey without much of a break. And you can assume that he was a little bit exhausted from that, right? Especially being a fucking teenager. He was probably a little worn down. So having this 4.5 months off for him to really reset his mind and prepare physically to come in and play some meaningful games, I feel like it probably worked really well in his favor. So he's also getting a lot of penalty kill time. He had mentioned in an interview, I believe it was post-game, after the St. Louis game, that he was in all of the penalty killing meetings throughout the year, and he was a penalty killer back in junior, and he played quite a bit in that game against St. Louis, and I thought he did a fantastic job. So if Kirby can turn into this two-way forward, I kind of joked last time that he would be like Jonathan Toews, just with more scoring ability, but he really could be. And I'm very curious to see what the kid does in actual meaningful games, because on Wednesday, at least, he had jump, he wanted the puck, he was dishing the puck, and he looked like he could be dominant all over the ice. So, at least for me, for the number 1 player to watch for Chicago, obviously aside from Toews and Kane, because they're gonna be good. For me, it's Kirby Dach. And number 2 on my list is Dominik Kubalik. Of course, he scored 2 more goals against St. Louis in that exhibition game. Both of them on the power play, which is amazing to see, really. We get very frustrated with the Blackhawks power play. So if he can keep putting in those goals on the power play for us, that would be incredible. He was one of the players in that Wednesday night game who looked like they really had jump from the get-go. So I'm hoping that will continue when the games actually matter. But of course, we don't know what kind of player he is in the playoffs. I'm just going to go with playoffs for the rest of this just to make it easier on myself. We don't know what kind of player he is in the playoffs, and sometimes players really, I don't know if it has something to do with a mindset of meaningful games or what, but sometimes they just fall off and they don't perform. Or sometimes you have a player that is just a straight up playoff performer, and the first one that comes to mind there for me is Joel Ward with Washington and then San Jose. Yeah, some guys are just monsters in the playoffs, and you don't expect it throughout the regular season. Of course, they're good players, but they really turn it up a notch. So, I mean, if Kubalik wants to come out and turn it up a notch, then the league better watch out, because again, he scored 30 goals in his rookie year. So I'm just very interested to see what he could take into the playoffs. My third player to watch for is Dylan Strome. So there were rumors, I want to say it was pretty close to when the league went on pause, that Strome was available for trade. So I feel like him getting to play with his best friend in DeBrincat and forming some chemistry between him and Patrick Kane, he would want to stick around, and the only way you're going to be able to stick around is if you show that you're worth it, especially with the cap not going up due to the stoppages and due to not getting any in-arena revenue. Strome's really going to have to prove that he is worth another contract with the Blackhawks, and what better time to do that in a playoff crunch time. So he might be a little lower on the list of players to watch for, but I bumped him up so high because he will be looking to prove that he belongs and wants to stay around here if he does. I mean, if he doesn't, he can do whatever the hell he wants, but he's going to have another team interested in him. So I could see Strome having a good playoffs, but I could also see it going the other way and it just making him seem a little more dispensable, which I hate to say because I've liked his quote-unquote tenure so far in Chicago. My next player is Alex DeBrincat. So even though he was in the top 5 point leaders on the Blackhawks, which wasn't very hard to do, he is a sniper. He is known for his goal scoring, and he only put up 18 goals this year in 70 games. Obviously, it was 12 less games than he could potentially play, so I'm assuming he would have at least gotten over 20 goals. But he was snake-bitten all season. He wasn't scoring when he should. He was sailing pucks wide or just whiffing on them completely. He definitely has the monkey on his back when it comes to scoring. So what I'm looking for in these playoffs is for DeBrincat to get his scoring touch back, because if the Blackhawks want to have playoff success, whether it be this year or even going forward, because the goal is to always be in contention for the Stanley Cup unless you're rebuilding. But this team doesn't seem like it ever wants to give in to a full rebuild. You need to have Alex DeBrincat putting in goals for you, especially on the power play. So he did get moved down to the second power play unit. And I am wondering if that will be even better for him. Of course, he won't have Patrick Kane feeding him the puck, but he won't have as much pressure on him. So if Kubalik can keep putting in pucks on the first unit and we can get DeBrincat going on the second unit, our power play is going to look a lot more threatening than it has for years? Years? Yeah, I'm going to go with years there, because I feel like I've been frustrated with the Blackhawks power play since the beginning of time. So we're going to go with years. My next player to watch for is Drake Caggiula. So when it comes to playoff time, of course, you need your top guys to perform, but things tighten up so much and become so defensive in the playoffs. You really need your depth guys to play a role and get you some dirty goals when it matters. And of course, Andrew Shaw is still out with his concussion. He's the one that would normally put in those goals for us and has in 13 and 15 when we won the Cups. But this year, I really think Drake Caggiula could play that role. And he was on the Edmonton Oilers before coming over to the Blackhawks. And he usually plays pretty well against them when they match up. So this is like the ideal playoff round or qualifying series for him to go into if he really wants to break out and shine in that depth role. He can show his other team they shouldn't have traded him, although thank God that they did because we don't have Brandon Manning anymore. But he also said he wants to stay in Chicago because this is an RFA year for him. So he's another guy looking for a contract, and if he can really come out and show that he's worth it and play that bottom six role really well and maybe chip in a couple points here or there, or at least get under the skin of some of the Oilers, I think Drake Caggiula could be very effective for the Blackhawks in this series. Up next, I have Duncan Keith, who, if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, I have been very hard on Keith, and I will say it's only because I love him, of course, and only because I know he can do better, but, yeah, you could just tell that age and all of the playoff wars were really catching up with him. He was slowing down. He wasn't the Duncan Keith that we knew, which, I mean, 3 Cups in 6 years, he's getting older. What more can you really expect from the guy? He's given everything to this team. But it just kind of sucks seeing players that you love who are Norris Trophy winners break down like that. So I've been a little harder on Keith than maybe I should have been. But it does get kind of frustrating to watch him just shoot pucks at shin pads of opposing defenders all the time. But over the pause, when there were no games being played, he seemed like he was really putting in the work. He got more active on social media and was posting pictures of him working out and whatnot. And in that game against St. Louis, he did look like he could show signs of his old self. I didn't see any defensive breakdowns when it came to his game. He didn't look slow. So I think if we can get a prime-looking Duncan Keith, even in just this first series here, that is going to do wonders for the Blackhawks. So I'm interested to see what he does and how he looks, and if he really does look rejuvenated. And then last up for the Blackhawks, I have Calvin DeHaan, who I have been a big fan of since his days with the Islanders. He is a steady defenseman back there on the blue line, but he is coming off of a bunch of shoulder injuries and shoulder surgeries. He just had one at the beginning of this calendar year when Seabrook had his surgeries too, but he is back. He's ready to go. He did get those 2 penalties against St. Louis on Wednesday, but that's usually not his deal. So I'm guessing that was him just getting back into game shape, getting back to the speed of game time decisions and all that. So if he can eliminate that from his game going forward, and if he can look like the Calvin DeHaan of old, that's going to also be very good for the Blackhawks, especially if him and Keith are both being really solid defenders back there. So those are my players to look for the Blackhawks. And I do have a couple of players to watch for the Oilers. First up, I have Kyler Yamamoto. So this is his 3rd year with the Oilers. He played, I want to say, close to 30 games with them this year. The previous 2 years, I believe it was just single-digit games. But he's really starting to break out and make a name for himself in the NHL. In his season with Edmonton this year, he had 11 goals and 15 assists for 26 points. And like I said, just about 30 games. He scored in their exhibition game on Tuesday. So if this kid really gets going and is really feeling himself coming into this series, I mean, geez, how many offensive threats can we really deal with, right? So that would just be another one to add to the list. My second player to watch for is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. So he's been on the Oilers through some very, very dark times. And he's stuck it out. He's finally back in the playoffs after that 2017 run and missing the playoffs were so many more years of his career. He's not the top line center anymore. That goes to McDavid. I believe he's playing wing on McDavid's line now. But you can't count this guy out because if you ignore him just to focus on the top two, he's going to wreak havoc on you. He's going to score points. He's going to get into that open space where you are drawn away from with McDavid running around the ice. So he's number 3 on their point scoring list for this year, but he's on my list for players to watch because I feel like he can get kind of left out of the discussion because of how good the top 2 are. Third on my list is Darnell Nurse. He had 5 goals, 28 assists for 33 points this year, and he's a defenseman. So, he is large, he is fast, and he can really dish the puck, and if you have him dishing the puck off to McDavid or Draisaitl, you are in trouble. He can take over games, he could take over a whole series. I feel like even though he is talked about as being a very good defenseman, I feel like he's still underrated. Watch out for Darnell Nurse. His sister is also a very good hockey player as well. And then there's Zach Kassian, who is also on their point leaders top 5, but he's more of a rough around the edges player, a guy who will drop the gloves, a guy whose job it is to get under the skin of opposing players, a guy who is going to push you around a bit. So watch out for Kassian because if he can do his job well and if he gets into the minds of the Blackhawks, it is going to be an even steeper mountain to climb for them to get out of that. So going on to their point leaders, of course, Leon Draisaitl had an absolutely ridiculous season. 71 games played, not even a full season, of course, because of the pause in March. But 71 games played, 43 goals, 67 assists, 110 points in March. In March, the beginning of March even, 110 points. It's just insane. And then second up is McDavid. He only played 64 games. He had 34 goals, 63 assists for 97 points. That's just annoying because that's his number, 97. That's like some Sidney Crosby nonsense with everything having to be 87 because that's his number. Those two, 110 points, 97 points by the beginning of March. I mean, it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough. They're going to score. You have to just have that in your mind. They're going to score. It's going to happen. We just need to score more than they do. So third on their top point leaders list is Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, like I mentioned before. In 65 games, he had 22 goals and 39 assists for 61 points. Again, he's a scorer. You can't write him off and just pay attention to the big 2. Zach Kassian is number 4, 59 games played, 15 goals, 19 assists for 34 points. So not only is he going to rough you up, he's going to score on you as well. So obviously he is a guy to keep your eye on. And then rounding out their top 5, we have a defenseman, Oscar Klefbom, with 5 goals, 29 assists for 34 points. And right behind him, in number 6, was Darnell Nurse, who I mentioned before. So Edmonton has a they have a strong top-end talent base, I will say. I don't really know how else to phrase that. You really have to watch for their top guys, and that's why the playoffs usually come down to who can play the best depth roles, because our top defensive guys will be focused on their top offensive guys and vice versa. So whoever has the most depth going into this series, and obviously, unless McDavid and Draisaitl obviously just completely take over, but I mean, we have Patrick Kane who can do the same thing on our side, so it's going to come down to the depth, guys. So then we move on to the storylines that I have in mind here, and the first one up is the goaltenders. So I read the rosters before. I'm assuming the two guys suiting up for Chicago are going to be Corey Crawford and Malcolm Subban, just based on who played the game against St. Louis on Wednesday. And the Oilers have Mike Smith and Koskinen. They do have that third goaltender, but it's going to be between these two. So both coaches were asked today who gets the net for Game 1, and neither of them would divulge the information. So we are clueless going into tomorrow who is going to be starting in net for either team. If I had to guess, my assumption would be Corey Crawford up against Mike Smith. So Koskinen had better regular season numbers for Edmonton, but he doesn't have any NHL postseason experience, whereas Mike Smith has a bit. He has 24 games played. He's gone 11-12 in those games, but he does have, according to Sportsnet stats, the highest career save percentage in the postseason for NHL goaltenders, with at least 10 career playoff games, with a save percentage of .938. So, I mean, if you're the coach, you haven't had games in 4.5 months. You come back, you have to pick a starting goaltender for the playoffs. You see that Mike Smith has a career .938 save percentage in the postseason. Yes, he's gone 11-12, but it's either him or a guy with no playoff experience. I would go with Mike Smith. I did hear that maybe Koskinen had a better camp, but again, I have no idea. I wasn't there. I don't keep up with Oilers Twitter, so that was just something that I came across. So I don't know. They could surprise us. Koskinen did get the start in their exhibition game against Calgary, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. So we'll see what he decides to go with. It's going to be very interesting. Of course, Crawford up against Mike Smith would be a replay of the 2012 series. Mike Smith being on a different team since he was with the Coyotes then. But that will definitely make for an interesting storyline. Either way, really, if Mike Smith gets the bench or if he gets the net, it'll make for a very interesting story. So then my last point for this series is what it really comes down to, and that is the Oilers' speed versus the Blackhawks' defense. And I don't mean the defense just as the 6 guys dressed on the ice back there helping out Crawford or Subban. When I say defense, I mean team defense, so that involves every single guy on the ice, because the Oilers are a speedy team. They can beat you up and down the ice. If we get into a track meet with them, it's not going to look good for the Blackhawks at all. We do have some younger guys on the roster, as I went over before, but when you put them up against McDavid, Athanasiou, Tyler Ennis, Leon Draisaitl, no, you're not going to win that track meet. I mean, your goaltender might bail you out. You might still win those games, but they're not going to be pretty. You're going to be setting your goalie up for failure or having to make 40-plus saves. So if the Blackhawks can play a smart and disciplined game and be well positioned and not commit any bad penalties or have the defenders pinch where they shouldn't to lead to odd man rushes, then maybe they have more of a fighting chance against the wheels on this Oilers team. I feel like that's going to be the biggest hurdle for them to climb. I have faith in our goaltenders to be able to stop pucks no matter who is in net. Of course, Crawford and Subban did combine for that shootout in St. Louis. Yes, it was an exhibition game. Yes, the defense kept most of the shots to the outside, but it still comes down to them to stop the pucks, and they did that. So I believe in them to make most of the saves that they should. Hopefully they will make some of the saves that they necessarily shouldn't, and you're just kind of like, how did that not go in? We can only hope for that. I won't expect it, since, of course, like I said before, the Blackhawks really shouldn't have been in the playoffs at all, but here we are. It's going to be interesting. That's just what scares me the most, is the speed on that Oilers team and what they can create from it if they do break away from your defense. Because if Connor McDavid gets around you, he's likely scoring on that breakaway. Same for Draisaitl, same for you name it, up and down the lineup. We do have good goaltenders on breakaways. I've heard Subban is good one-on-one. I don't know. We've seen a total of 31 minutes of him, and I don't think he faced a breakaway. So we'll see if he does get the net. Hopefully he does. Crawford is pretty good on the breakaways. He's probably one of the better goaltenders in the league. When it comes to it, I don't have those numbers. Maybe that's just a biased thought, but when he's back there and there is a breakaway, I'm pretty confident in it. Of course, some do go in. This is hockey, a game of inches, but I don't know. Our team is getting younger. Like I mentioned in the last one, we're one of the youngest teams going into this playoff series, qualifying series, round, whatever you want to call it. But they're not necessarily super speedy guys, and the guys on our back end aren't known for being speedy, like I said before, except Adam Boqvist. And if you listen to the last episode and recall, I said he didn't really impress me in that game against St. Louis. So I hope he shows us something better against Edmonton, and I fully believe that he will. He is a great player and is only going to get better. So that's what that comes down to. The puck drops at 2 p.m. on Saturday. It's on NBC. And there are a lot of other games tomorrow as well. So you're basically, if you're like me, not everybody watches as much hockey as humanly possible. But if you are like me and you will watch any game that is on, you're basically just going to be parked in front of your TV. So the first game on tomorrow is Rangers versus Hurricanes at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We have the Blackhawks and Oilers, of course, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. local time here in Illinois. We have Panthers and Islanders at 4 Eastern Time. Canadians and Penguins at 8 o'clock Eastern. And then we round out the evening of the first day of playoff hockey with the Jets and the Flames coming up at 10:30 Eastern Time. So those are a bunch of exciting matchups. I'm a little upset that the Panthers and Islanders game is going to be on at the same time as the Blackhawks game, but hopefully the intermissions won't match up and I'll be able to flip over and watch some of that game when ours is at intermission. But we have real meaningful hockey tomorrow. I am beyond excited. This was not really a short episode at all. I have talked for 54 minutes. My voice is probably going to give out on me. So if it is shaking or cracking, I apologize. I will end this now. But I will be live tweeting the game tomorrow. You can follow along at VF Center Ice Pod on Twitter. Again, that'll be in the show notes. And if you want to follow us on Instagram, that is at From Center Ice Pod. And of course, we have a Facebook page, and you can check that out too. I'm also going to be working on, I don't know, I won't spoil it. I'm going to be working on something else. Hopefully by next episode, I will have that info to drop for you. So yeah, go follow on all the places. We have actual Blackhawks hockey tomorrow that means something, and I would really appreciate it if you could hop on over to iTunes and subscribe and give us a rating and a review. That would mean a lot to me. It helps us out. And again, if there's anything else you guys want me to try to research for you when it comes to either this series or any upcoming ones, I guess not necessarily Blackhawks, because either way I will be podcasting. Yeah, just let me know, whether it's email or Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Feel free to reach out, and I will be talking at you guys tomorrow via Twitter, and probably tomorrow via another podcast or Sunday at the latest. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will catch you next time. Bye!